Hello, I'm Sarah Knight. I'm Head of Data and Digital Capability at JISC and really delighted to be with you today. A great opportunity really to share some work we've been doing at JISC around how we can support students' digital experience in the new normal. And this is going to be based on and picks up some of the themes that you have probably been discussing, no doubt, in some of your other sessions today. But for our work, we have been having some quite large consultations with the sector over the past few months around how staff and students are experiencing remote working and learning in this new normal. So some of the themes that I'm going to be picking up on today are very much linked into the work that you'll see on that screen around shaping the digital future of FE and also our Learning and Teaching Reimagined programme. And there's a lot more detail from those links. And I know, Deb, I've shared the slides with you, so you'll be able to share these slides post-event as well to follow up on. But the areas that we're going to be touching on include digital inequality, ensuring that all students have access to the tools that they need to learn, which not just only includes the devices, but thinking about the Wi-Fi, the broadband, the space in which they're learning. Looking at how we can really redesign our learning and teaching and very much ensure that technology is a seamless part of that, but very much still linked through sound pedagogical approaches. We have to consider, if we're not already, developing our students' digital capabilities and confidence. That is coming through all the consultation work that we have been doing. The assumption there from students is to say, don't assume we all know how to use all of these tools for our learning. We need you as staff to really be guiding us, and that's absolutely crucial. And of course, as we are doing today, also giving our students opportunities to develop those online collaboration skills, which to us, I think, having now had nearly 5.5 months of online working, I think we're all still, as you just saw, trying to share my screen, still trying to sort of grapple around with some of those issues. So there's a lot there that we need to be unpicking. So what I'd like to share with you is some evidence that we have now got from our students around their experiences of using technology. We within JISC, and I know you have done at Grimsby, you have been running our Digital Experience Insights surveys with some of your students so that you can better gather their views and their experiences of how they are using technology. And that is not just in their courses, but also thinking more broadly about their use of technology as outside of the college, also thinking about what skills they need to develop in relation to digital going forward. Now, I know we've got colleagues who are coming from HE as well as FE backgrounds. So what I've tried to do in sharing some of the evidence, and this is a sneak preview because we launch these reports in 2 weeks' time. So you are one of the first colleges and groups and staff to get access to all of this, but more will follow. But what we are able to do is to share the experiences of nearly 20,000 learners from FE, as well as over 20,000 student responses from HE. So that's quite a large base of evidence to draw some of our conclusions on. Now, what you'll see there, though, is that some of the data was collected post and pre-COVID. So some of that has to be taken into account. But we do believe on analysing the pre and post that actually some of the attitudes and behaviours will take a lot longer to form. So there wasn't a significant difference in the responses that we were collecting pre and post COVID. In a year's time, I think there will be, and that is something I'll move on to at the end in terms of how we are updating and reviewing our question sets for this October. Now, within our surveys, of which you have got opportunities to run at no cost for the coming year for your colleges, we have got 4 areas within the survey for students, and you'll see that replicated for teaching staff and also for professional services staff. So question sets around you and your technology and how you're using the technology at your college, technology on your course, and lastly about developing your digital skills. So I'm going to go through each of those sections and give you a little bit of highlights, some of the highlights coming through, and then draw that together in some of the conclusions that we need to be thinking about next steps and how we can then move our practice forward to ensure that all students have that equitable and excellent experience of the digital environment when they come back in the new academic year. Now, this is a question I think that has raised in prominence, and we have run these surveys for the past 4 years, but this year obviously was one of the most critical questions that we were asking, and it's something that will be critical going forward, where we need to know what devices our students are having access to. And it's interesting when you start to look, and I know it's something that we are quite cautious at doing in terms of comparisons between FE and HE. But when you have got students that are in your college on HE and FE courses, it is interesting to look at some of the differences that are coming through in relation to those different numbers there. So although both FE and HE, there are some very positive figures there in relation to the amount of devices that they may own, there's still a question around how those devices are used for learning. Are they sufficient enough spec? Do they have access to the institutional systems and software that they would be needing to use? And, also importantly, I think particularly on the FE side, as we know that there are some learners who may not have access at all. And a smartphone is not sufficient now if you are looking at remote learning, to when they perhaps were coming into college and were using it perhaps just to pick up on key dates and information. So really important to be thinking about that in terms of knowing what your students have access to. And of course, in relation to that is also thinking about their Wi-Fi, their space to learn. Now, we asked a question about attitudes and confidence in using technology. And this is a new question we brought in this year. And you'll see there that on the confidence side, students are quite confident. And we always expect students to be quite confident in terms of saying, yes, we can actually use all of this. But then when we ask them, do you actually enjoy trying out new and innovative technologies? The numbers there are slightly lower. So it is important for learners, and I always say this, particularly when we're thinking about start of term, to be very explicit to your students around how and why you are using the different types of technology. What is the purpose of it? What are you using for collaboration? What are you using for communication? What are they losing in terms of submission of work? And of course, I know that you have got your learning platform, your Canvas that you use very effectively, but it's also still making that explicit to students so that they know why they are using these different types of technology and how they're using it and how it's going to support their learning. But also further ahead, thinking about as you are moving through your journey and perhaps into the workplace, these are technologies you will actually use in the workplace as well. Thinking about Teams, of course, which we're using today. Now, I always, part of the survey analysis that we do is not just about the stats, it's also about the qualitative. And at a local level, colleges, I think, have found it really valuable to analyse some of the free text comments. And some of these are quite sobering, because, particularly if we're looking at the two that I've got on the screen there, we think, well, everyone knows Microsoft Word. But if a student has, or if a learner has only been using their phone, they may not have had the practice in using, the Office-based packages. Access to sort of hardware, very sobering comment there from an HE student. So the surveys are a great way of just remembering that not everyone has got, the software, the skills, the expertise that we would expect. And are able to give some quite valuable local insights as well. Moving on to theme 2, which is around technology in your organisation. We can see there we've got some figures there around the excellent provision that both colleges and universities, or the HE provision, are experiencing. And I think that's a real, as we've seen over the years, that percentage has increased year on year. So I think we are getting to the stage now where students are really valuing the digital experience that they are having within their college. We've still got some quite sort of low figures there in relation to access to Wi-Fi, which is still concerning. And I think, access to reliable Wi-Fi, it could be that students' expectations are rising and continuing to rise. It could be that they are experiencing differences across their different campuses when they move, or different sites. So that's something that still is something there. And whether we'll ever reach 100%, I doubt, because, you know, expectations continue to rise. But it's also in the new question set, we'll be looking at access to Wi-Fi from outside of the college, in addition to on-site. Equally, there's figures around access to online systems and resources from anywhere. Again, one would need to ensure that that is, you know, those percentages are nearly close to 100 in order to be able to support the remote learning for your learners. And of course, the increase in expectation from students that they will or could need support in accessing learning through their own devices. So there's some quite important areas there that we need to be checking for student access, both on and off campus. Access to digital resources, and you can see here that there are some quite significant differences. Particularly around, from the HE side, access to ebooks and e-journals, which is surprising considering that, you know, we at JISC have done a lot of work in promoting access to e-resources and e-journals within FE. So some of this may be learners' perceptions rather than actual, you know, that the learners perhaps might not be signposted as clearly to some of where these type of resources sit. And particularly if we're thinking about induction, really important to ensure that students are aware where they can access the different types of supporting materials that they need. Recorded lectures, I would expect that to differ hugely next year, when if FE learners are working remotely, they would have access to recorded materials. Whereas for HE, it's very much in the context of lecture capture being on site. So there could be some differences there. I love the word clouds. So from all the qualitative responses, we're able to generate some word clouds here. And it's also interesting just to see over the years as well, the increase both in institutional systems and in terms of the personal learning systems that students are using, or collaboration systems that they're using. And really, I think this is probably the first year where we start to see systems like Teams, you know, the Microsoft, the Googles, almost having almost equitable status to some of the personal learning collaboration tools that students are using. But what an interesting mix there. And again, you know, showing the wealth of, you know, tools and apps that students are using outside of the learning environment that their institution is presenting them with. This is a bit of a sobering stat there, because I do think that with all the work we've done over the years at JISC in terms of student partners, the role of the surveys, which in itself is to broaden, empower learners to feel they can support their work around ensuring their voice is heard in relation to developing the digital environment. You'll see the percentages of learners and students that feel they have got the chance to be involved in digital decisions is still quite low. So there is an opportunity to really ensure that students do feel they are able to put their views forward, that they can give feedback around their experience, and hope that their views, particularly as we're moving through this uncertain time, that they have got the opportunity of regularly feeding back to their staff around how they are experiencing their learning. And obviously that is going to be more challenging when we're not having them face to face, and that we are going to be needing more of their online collaboration to get their views and experiences coming forward. So looking at technology and your learning, and I've really just pulled out some of the points here. There's a lot more detail in the full reports that should be available in 2 weeks' time. And while I'm going through this, I'd be really interested in your thoughts around how your students would be responding to these questions, and just starting to think, yes, that would be similar, or perhaps no, actually that would be quite different in terms of our learners' experiences. Again, I think here we've seen it year-on-year increase around the quality of the digital teaching and learning that students are experiencing. And I think there's some very positive messages around that first stat. And then secondly, I think still the areas where students get the most support from using technology in their learning is important. And of course, it goes back to teaching staff and lecturers being the most important source of support for learners, particularly in FE. And again, that goes back to ensuring that those staff have got the skills to be able to support their students effectively with digital. We're seeing there that online videos are still coming through as a mechanism of support, and certainly a lot of focus group work we do with students, and you ask them, so if your tutor isn't available, where do you go for support? And of course, a lot of the students will reply to say, well, YouTube, of course, because we can always find something on there that's going to help us understand that concept or that particular area. Now, looking again, these were asking students around digital tools or apps learners find really useful for learning, and what a wealth of responses that we've had there. Certainly more so than we've had in any other previous years. Sorry. Sorry, just a moment. I have got 3 boys that are still I'm just in the middle of a conference. Okay, so you're going to have to wait. So yeah, you can. Okay. Apologies. So what we have here with our 2 word clouds is we're obviously starting to see a lot more use of again, Google Teams, the wealth of resources in there that we're seeing students are using, and also some sort of similarities, I think, coming through on the HE side as well. The institutional systems coming in there, but also blending with the other apps and tools that staff are using. A lot there around Quizlet, the ways in which we can provide that interactivity with students. So I think, again, some really interesting perceptions in there, and of course YouTube coming through again quite strongly. So this question is trying to give an indication around where learners are in relation to their use of the activities that they are doing over the course of a month. And you'll see that it starts off with quite high percentages there around digital feedback, working with sort of data, looking at the ways in which they are using technology in their learning. But as we get to the bottom, it's interesting to see that those figures sort of go down quite considerably. And to think that we're still saying that 33% of FE and 44% of HE students never have the opportunity of working online with other learners. And that is really still surprising. And I think particularly as we go forward, that is an area that we are going to need to support learners on in terms of ensuring there are opportunities to do the online collaboration work, but recognising that that might not come as something they are comfortable with, and looking at ways in which you can really support them with that. And of course, the last one, and I know Deb's going to be smiling because I know the brilliant work you do at Grimsby, but thinking about the ways in which we can use simulations, VR and AR, particularly now in terms of replicating some of the work that they would be doing in the actual environment. So moving forward, they are looking at technology in your learning and looking at some questions there that relate most useful to students. And here I think when we ask students what would they find most useful, all right, yes, upstairs, okay. Sorry, 2 more days and then I'm hoping normality will return. So what is most useful to students? Obviously, students are saying they want to have more practice. They want to be able to look at ways in which they can test their knowledge. Yes, there is some there in relation that they would really like course-related videos. Yes, there are YouTube videos, but they really want their work that is very contextual to them. So some interesting views coming forward there. And when we ask what one thing should your college do to improve the quality of digital teaching and learning, again, there were some similarities coming through there. And one of the themes that came through most strongly was to recognise that teaching staff do need more support in relation to using digital effectively. And that was both on the HE and the FE side. A lot of the other themes were more Quizlets, more polls, make learning more interactive, recording, ensuring that lectures are recorded and uploaded promptly. So, again, thinking more about access to learning in the remote world, that's something that, we do need to make sure we are able to do. Now, the last theme is looking at digital skills. And here there were, again, some figures there that are very much around linking through to the quality of support students are receiving in relation to developing their digital skills. Now, As we had, high 70s for the other questions around quality of the digital environment, quality of learning and teaching, when asked around the quality of support to develop digital skills, those numbers dropped considerably down to 66 and 60%. So there is a recognition there from students that they are needing more support, they're expecting more support. Quite concerningly, 20%, 21% of FE&H students did not discuss their digital skills during induction, during one-to-one sessions with tutors, or in lectures and classes, or with any other learners. And that is a concern, that students are finding that they're not having that opportunity to discuss their skills. 51% of students agreed they received guidance around the digital skills they needed for their course. Now, as I was saying earlier about being explicit around why you're using technology, how it's going to support their learning, what tools they're going to be using in their course, it's also really important to be explicit to staff around the guidance around what digital skills they are going to need for their course, how that relates to when they move out into the workplace, and to be very explicit about that. Also, very low percentage of students agreed that their organisation provided them with a chance to assess their digital skills. And again, if we are thinking about progression and moving forward, that is an area that students were recognising they needed more support with. So again, asking them, what one thing could your college do to support learners to develop their digital skills? They wanted more opportunities to talk to their tutors around how they could develop their digital skills. They wanted individual assessment of their skills, more time to practice, but importantly, integrating that within their course context rather than having it something that is separate and aside. And that came through very strongly on the HE side as well, that they wanted to have that opportunity of developing the skills they would need that were going to enable them to progress into the workplace with the skills that they were required. So to try and summarise all of that and bring some conclusions to that, and this is where our reports are going to go into more detail that we're going to be publishing on the 14th of September. Those themes that we started with at the beginning that were coming through from our consultation were very much echoed in relation to the themes that were coming through from our evidence base of the data we collected. We have to ensure that we are tackling that digital poverty. We always said the digital divide was going to get reduced, but the digital divide, I think now that we're in with the new normal, could grow. And, we're not just talking about, as we said before, the access issues. It's also about the inclusion. It's also about accessibility, and particularly thinking about the legislation that is now in. We really need to ensure that both staff have an awareness of what's required and how to make their learning accessible for all, as well as ensuring students have access to the learning. There is a huge opportunity for us not to go back to what we did, not to replicate what we did in the classroom in terms of delivery, but think about new ways we can really engage our learners, give them those skills that they need for the workplace, the collaboration, the communication, the group working online, and to really ensure that that is within our learning design. And of course, we need to be developing our learners' digital capabilities and their confidence and their resilience, particularly as we go forward. And that's not just in terms of thinking about this from induction, it's thinking throughout that learner's journey and progression with you. So to end off, I hope that's given you a little bit of a interest in terms of exploring the full reports that are due out on the 14th. We've got webinars which will be due to be going on our JISC website very shortly on the 16th and 17th, where we'll go into more detail. And importantly, I hope that we'll be able to work with you on the new question sets that we launched in October, where we have completely revisited our questions. They are very much now going to be applicable to the COVID context, the different contexts colleges and institutions will be working within, and a great opportunity, I think, again, for you to gather the data that you'll need in order to be able to ensure that the quality of the digital experience is going to be the best that you can provide. So I'm going to pause there and I'm going to hand back to Deb and see if we've got any questions.
Hi Sarah, thank you very much for that. I have seen quite a lot of the data from previous years. It does seem to have changed a little bit. it was really reassuring to hear a lot of that from a Grimsby perspective, because we've just created an online student induction, a student level up course. So we've got 20 courses coming out covering so many of those things. So hopefully, I don't think our feedback this year will have changed significantly, but hopefully next year I'm hoping to see a difference. So that was quite reassuring, and also very selfish of me to say that, but maybe I'm letting my colleagues know that we're kind of doing things to overcome that. And as Deb pointed out earlier, we did hand out 400 devices and dongles for some of our learners, but yet still there are many left out, and you know, that is something we need to tackle. And perhaps in the round table, which is next, David Cork, who presses the purse strings of the government, might be able to enlighten us and say what's happening there. But I haven't got any more questions there. Has anyone else? Is that quite no, Polly?
I think it's great just to see, Deb, from what you were saying, that so much of what is there almost validates what you're doing. And I think that's really important, that you have, you know, you've got that strong evidence base locally, but nationally, to say what we're doing is the right thing to be doing, and that we are, again, leading the sector in many ways around this work.
Anyone got any questions before I stop? Oh, there we go. We've got Mark from Adobe. You're on mute. Come on, boy.
There we go. Schoolboy error. Sorry about that. So I'm thinking back from my Cambridge days now, and I'm just thinking about that in that context. And yeah, I totally chime with the stats, and I think this is fantastic. But I'm interested in the question about discussing digital skills, that actually 20% and 21% of students didn't know what digital skills they needed. And I'm just wondering whether that's maybe because it wasn't signposted. I'm just wondering whether there was any kind of negative factors to that.
I think there's two things. I think what comes through us very strongly in our research is that sometimes there is that misperception that students know what they need to know, and that, you know, they're so capable in using devices in their own learning that they don't need any support in terms of being directed by their tutors, and they do. So I think a lot of it is about being clearer. It's about showing the benefits of the different tools and technologies that are being used, and actually openly having that discussion with students. And that naturally forms part of the learning discussions that you're having. And I think now that we're moving into the new normal, we can't not do that, because it absolutely has to be part in order for us to know whether our students are having that equitable base and understanding in which to progress from. Otherwise, there are those barriers which they won't be able to overcome.